Well, good afternoon, folks. I think we're going to get started. The first thing we're going to figure out is why this microphone isn't working, but since it's not, I'll just wait until it works and talk loud. My name is Patrick Barkey. I'm the moderator for this breakout session. As you can see from the slide, the session is titled Oil and Gas Advancements in an Uncertain World, Technology, Policy, and Economics. And we're delighted to have some outstanding speakers here. Just a couple things. The way this is going to work is we're going to allow each of our panelists, and we have two this afternoon, to give a brief presentation. And in fact, that presentation is going to be, as you see, it's going to be interleaved. So both Dr. Whitsitt and Dr. Todd are going to get up in turn at various points of the presentation. I would ask that you refrain from asking questions until we're done with the presentation part of the program. I think we're a pretty small group, so I don't see any reason why we can't diverge from the large audience model of putting questions on cards and simply ask questions directly to me, and then I'll direct the question to each of the expert over here. So let me talk a little bit about our speakers. We have a great group of panelists, two of them. One we've already heard from a little bit this morning, Dr. Bill Whitsitt, who's our very own executive in residence at the university's Bureau of Business and Economic Research here in the School of Business Administration. He's joined BBR following his retirement as executive vice president at Devon Energy Corporation, which was merely the last of many stops in a very successful career encompassing public affairs and energy, and also working as a broadcast journalist, originally from Great Falls. So that's wonderful to have Bill with us again for this session. And we're also joined by Dr. Burt Todd. Dr. Todd is an assistant professor, and he's department chair of petroleum engineering just down the road at Montana Tech. And Dr. Todd has been at Montana Tech since when?
Well, 75.
75, okay. So kind of a Grover Cleveland thing, coming and going there. Good. And he's got 20 years of experience in petroleum industry, working in research and development at Phillips Petroleum. And he's got a degrees from, as PhD, his doctorate is from the University of Kansas. So without any ado, I'd like to just set the tone for the session. And as we said in the blurb in the book, it's really difficult to find an industry as mature as oil and gas industry is that's seen the kind of changes that have occurred in that industry. It's hard to find another one to match it, in other words. This panel is going to address the profound impacts of those changes, both locally and globally. And you know, when you talk about change, change is trite. We always talk about change. But really, when you look at an industry where 40 years ago we all drove cars that collectively averaged just 12.5 miles a gallon, we know that's not the case. But then you look at the trends that have changed in the energy industry are just enormous, both on consumption and on production and on conservation. Americans are driving less, we heard this morning. Crude oil production is sharply ramped up. You've also heard that this morning. And also locally, there's been huge changes in terms of wages in the Bakken. Average salary in Williston, in real terms, is more than double today what it was just 10 years ago. And natural gas revenues collected by the state east of us, as recently as 5 years ago, were $200 million. Now they're $3.2 billion. So you look at an industry that's changed that much. There's a lot going on, a lot we need to learn about. And so let's just get the program started and have Bill Whitsitt come up here and start talking about some of the advances in oil and gas. Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you, Pat. And I'm going to try to put one of these little microphones on here just so I can move around. And I think since they're recording, it's probably a good idea to have the mic on. But we're going to move pretty fast today. And I want to talk at the beginning about the fact that what we're really talking about here is revolution. We're talking about revolution in the oil and gas space, but not just what we sometimes think about hydraulic fracturing. It's all that goes with it these days. And Burt is going to dig deeply into fracturing and some of those things. But the way I look at the oil and gas revolution, we really have some new things. And I put new in quotes because they're not really new. We're appreciating them in new ways, or people are paying attention to them in new ways. There are some things below ground and some things above ground that you see on that slide, beginning with resources. When we stop and think, and we'll talk more about this, that the shale revolution as it began, now the tight resource revolution as it's evolved, really only began in the early 2000s. And when you think about the fact that it's not all that long ago that we were thinking about importing natural gas, and we were talking about running out of oil and all of those kinds of things, that paradigm has shifted now. And in the public conscious, it started really in 2009, and I don't know that this commercial is going to play, but it was a Eureka advertising campaign that was done by the America's Natural Gas Alliance that played around the country and particularly focused in Washington, saying, wait a minute, we have a 100-year supply of natural gas. Well, the Potential Gas Committee just announced a couple of weeks ago that we actually have 2,800 trillion cubic feet of natural gas resources that are available potentially down the road. That includes all different categories, but it's a lot of gas. Well, why is this revolution taking place? I'm going to just, at a very high level, give you a quick geology lesson for non-geologists. If we think about the fact that throughout the history of oil and gas development, we've known that oil and gas is cooked in source rocks, shale, where critters and plants have cooked for 350 million years. This is a sample of the Barnett Shale. I'm going to pass it around. Feel it and see how dense it is. The oil and gas is cooked in those rocks and seeps over a lot of time through more porous formations until it's trapped against a harder formation and causes a little pocket still within the pores of the rock. But that's how the oil and gas was trapped, and we would go explore and try to find these traps. Now, the fundamental nature of the revolution, if you don't remember anything else about what Burt and I are going to talk about today, is we're going to the source rocks. We started drilling wells horizontally to expose more of the wellbore to the source rock itself, and then pumped water, sand, and some additives in to crack that rock to expose even more of it and allow these molecules, these oil and gas deposits to slowly migrate to the wellbore and be produced economically. The first horizontal well with hydraulic fracturing in the Bakken Shale was drilled in 2002. That was the first commercial horizontal hydraulically fractured well. And it was drilled into this rock. And I'll pass this around. This is a section of the Bakken Shale. It's actually a bit of dolomite, clay, and sandstone, and maybe some other things that Burt can tell us about. But that well was in the year 2000. In the year 2002, the company I worked with did this on a large scale in the Barnett Shale of Texas and began proving that natural gas could be produced from those formations. So again, that's the fundamental. This is how it's done. The well is drilled vertically, it's turned horizontally. The drill bit is replaced with a perforation gun that is put into the formation with a lot of different equipment at the surface. Little charges go through the pipe or the casing on the wellbore, and they open holes through which you'll see fluid and sand. The sand is in the fluid in order to prop the little cracks open when the fluid is withdrawn. And once that process is done, and Burt will have a lot more to say about this, and the fluids and the sand are withdrawn, then the oil or the gas flows through the fissures to the wellbore and goes to the surface. At that point, all of that completion equipment, as we call it, goes away. The site is reclaimed back to a small wellhead, some valves, and maybe a couple of tanks, and that's the process of hydraulic fracturing. So again, it's at least conceptually not a complicated process, but it is very complicated, requiring geophysicists and reservoir engineers and lots of specialties. There's lots of these tight deposits. There's a map of the U.S. that kind of gives you a flavor of where they are. Around the world, there are other deposits. We could talk about that if somebody wanted. We happen to be blessed in this country with some of the best in the world and the infrastructure to support their development. You can see what's happened with tight oil production as a result of cracking the code, marrying these two technologies. It's been very dramatic. Pat alluded to it. The same is true for shale gas production. And if you look at just the recent Adam Ziminski energy outlook that he talked about this morning, there's the projection for shale gas and tight oil, from tight oil plays and shale gas, tight gas, and other forms of gas out to the year 2040. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Burt, and he's going to talk about what this really is all about in deeper detail. Burt, in this.
So it's kind of tricky whether two engineers can figure out how to make the audio-visual equipment work. But thus far, I'm guardedly optimistic we'll be able to pull this off. Greetings and good afternoon. I'd like to talk a little bit about hydraulic fracturing, but before I say anything about that, I recognize this is the Asia Montana Energy Summit. My talk here is very centered on issues that are relevant to Montana and the United States, but that should not bother anybody because the oil industry was born on this continent. The first oil well was drilled in 1859, and whatever happens here on this continent in energy eventually is exported to the rest of the world. And so if it's not relevant in other parts of the globe now, it will be in some very near-term point in time. So I'd like to talk a little bit about hydraulic fracturing. Why is it controversial? What does it do? Why do we use this technology? I'd like to structure this. First, got to figure out how to make this go. Okay, why all the fuss? I'd like to structure this presentation around this outline, just give a brief history of hydraulic fracturing, talk about when it became controversial, deal with a few myths and realities relating to hydraulic fracturing, and then eventually get on to the promise of some of these innovative technology. So what is hydraulic fracturing? Well, first of all, it's not fracking. Now, my wife is an English teacher, and she's kind of sensitive to this sort of thing. There's no K in that word. The proper term is hydraulic fracturing, and if you want to go shorter, you can call it fracking, but just put an apostrophe in there, not a K. My wife, I mean, she corrects my language all the time, and I wouldn't want to go get sideways over on an issue like this. What is it? Well, it is a method for stimulating oil and gas wells so that they produce more oil and gas at higher rates for a longer period of time. It is fundamentally helpful in the energy production world. Now, when did it start? Well, there's a lot of people who want to take credit for this. There's a group of people that think it had to happen in Duncan, Oklahoma in 1949. That's the corporate headquarters of Big Red, Halliburton. But there's an equally devoted group of people that think it started in 1946 in Hugoton, Kansas. Regardless, hydraulic fracture, one thing we do know is that it is an effective technique for bypassing the damage that happens in wells during the process of drilling and completing an oil well. Quick note here, when you drill an oil well, you want to have a wellbore full of drilling mud. It controls the pressure, it keeps the well from blowing out, it removes the drill cuttings, it does a lot of things that you absolutely have to have. But the downside of that is that drilling mud seals the wellbore up. You know, we don't want things flowing in before we're ready, but when it's time to produce the well, it is effectively sealed by the residue of that mud that's left behind. Here's kind of a crude cartoon drawing. That's the kind of drawings I like best. Top view, here's the wellbore, and then here is a region of the reservoir surrounding the wellbore that is plugged with leak-off, with drilling mud, with cement residue, all of the things that just naturally happen in the process of making a wellbore. And if you can't do something to get through that or get rid of it, your well never produces. So we introduce the hydraulic frac. We pressure up the wellbore, create a crack in the rock, and all of a sudden now there's a conduit into the wellbore. And we pack this crack with proppants, small grains of sand, and it creates a high conductivity channel, and all of a sudden we don't care about this damage anymore because we've got a path through here. Flow from the reservoir goes into the crack, down to the wellbore, and is produced. I think you can well imagine what a valuable tool this is in oil and gas production, because it leaves the damage in place, bypasses it, and gets the well production up. It cures a host of problems. It gets your well producing to the maximum potential. Now, how big are these fracs? Fractures typically range between 100 feet and 600 feet in length, and somewhere between 100 and 300 feet in height. Now this depends a little bit on geology. It depends a lot on geology. What are your stresses in the region around the wellbore? But it costs a lot to make a 600-foot frac. You certainly would never wastefully spend the money to create a frac capable of going from 10,000 feet to the surface. It's not cost effective, it doesn't help the well, and you never let a frac run away from you that way. What does it do for you? Well, a 600-foot frac will increase the production of a well by a factor of 3 if the well is undamaged, and by a factor of 50 or higher if the damage is severe. So it's a very effective tool for increasing oil and gas productivity. It's also a very common tool. On the average, somewhere above 35,000 wells per year are stimulated with this technique. And since the inception of hydraulic fracturing, either 1946 or 1949, depending on which camp you come from, it's been used on well over 1 million wells. Some people estimate as high as 2.5 million wells. It's a proven technology, it works, and when it's done correctly, it's safe. So, when did hydraulic fracturing become controversial? Well, as Bill alluded to, it has a lot to do with unconventional reservoirs. In the 1980s, beginning slowly and then gradually picking up steam through the 90s and into the double knots, the unconventional reservoir revolution began. And like Bill talked about, these are the low permeability source rocks that don't have enough natural flow potential to give you economic oil and gas rates. So these formations, these source rocks are drilled, long horizontal wells. We used to think a 1 mile horizontally was a long one, and then they went to 2 miles. Now there are some 4 and 5 horizontal length wellbores with hydraulic fracs spaced all along the wellbores. And this is what has sparked the unconventional reservoir revolution. These reservoirs are very large. The Barkey, we've all heard of this. It's several hundred miles across, several hundred miles north to south. Very large areas. And there's many others like this. There's the Barkey, there's the Marcellus Shale back in Pennsylvania, there's the Niobrara Shale, there's the Barnett Shale down in Texas. That's just a few. Some of these unconventional reservoirs, I'm thinking particularly the Marcellus in Pennsylvania and the Niobrara in Colorado, directly underlie large population centers. And that is the nub of the problem. How did hydraulic fracturing become controversial? Well, Americans love to drive and we love living inside climate-controlled houses. I know this because those are two of my favorite activities. I'm American. Well, the American public, and I'm white whiskers, I'm an old fella. I remember when hydraulic fracturing wasn't controversial. That is because the oil and gas were produced in rural areas of Texas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. And back in those days, hydraulic fracturing was safe, effective, and nobody cared about it one way or the other. However, when hydraulic fracturing and these unconventional reservoirs moved close to urban centers, suddenly fracturing is causing earthquakes, it contaminates groundwater, it contributes innumerable insidious evils. Everything up to and almost including the heartbreak of psoriasis is attributed to hydraulic fracturing. Now, why is that? I believe the entire controversy about hydraulic fracturing is directly related to the not in my backyard principles. Everyone recognizes we need prisons, we need mental health centers, we need drug addiction counseling centers. Hardly anyone wants them in their neighborhoods. And it's the same with oil and gas. This is a major industrial operation. It's loud, it's noisy, and right, nobody wants that in their backyard. And this has led to a lot of myths. There came a point where we stopped dealing with this on the basis of fact and science and started dealing with it on the basis of myth. One of these myths is that hydraulic fracturing causes earthquakes. Well, fortunately, this is like Mythbusters. We can put the myth to the test. We have sensitive downhole measuring devices, geophones, that we can measure the intensity of hydraulic fracturing. And it's been done in a number of areas. I know the print is really small, but there's the Barnett Shale, there's the Eagleford, there's the Haynesville, there's a number of these unconventional reservoirs where they've measured the intensity of these fracturing events, and it's small. Somewhere in the range of 10,000 to a million or 10 million times smaller than a 3.0 magnitude earthquake. According to the National Research Council, the process of hydraulic fracturing a well presently implemented for shale gas recovery does not pose a high risk for inducing seismic events. The actual energy is on the order of dropping a gallon of milk on your kitchen floor. It's just not that big of a seismic event. Another myth that has come up is that hydraulic fracturing endangers groundwater. To that, I would say that hydraulic fracturing has been used more than 1 million times since the 1940s. There have been numerous investigations by the EPA and other agencies. And again, they find that proper well construction protects the groundwater. And if you think about this in terms of something we all know, Bakken wells, these wells, 10,000 feet vertically, they're 10,000 feet deep vertically. The top 3,000 feet are cased and cemented to protect the groundwater, and then the hydraulic fracturing happens 7,000 feet below that. That's almost 1.5 miles. There are layers and layers of Mother Nature separating these Bakken fracks from the groundwater. In the words of Liza Jackson, a former U.S. Environmental Protection Agency administrator, talking about all the investigations done by the EPA, in no case have we made a definitive determination that the fracking process causes chemicals to enter the groundwater. Understand, this is the EPA. This is not some industry figurehead speaking here. These are the industry watchdogs. And I've dealt with the EPA many times over the last 40 years. They're good at what they do. And if there was incidents of fracturing, contaminated groundwater, they would have found it. Now, has there never been groundwater contaminated by oil and gas operations? Obviously that's happened. I've been involved in some of these cases. But it always is traceable to poor well construction, inadequately cementing the surface casing, inadequately dealing with some of the things that are regulations that are on the books now. Why is this important? We all care about groundwater. I come out of a farming and rancher background in the middle of central Montana. Nothing is more important than our water wells. We have to protect that. But we don't protect it by pointing the finger at something that is not the villain. Poor well construction, when groundwater is contaminated, is not fracking, it's poor well construction. That's what we have to focus on. There's another myth that has got a lot of circulation, and this one really breaks my heart. This myth that natural gas production is holding back renewable energy. We're so in love with natural gas that we don't go after solar, we don't go after the wind. The reality is that the opposite is very true. I grew up out on the prairies. There were days when the wind just about drove me mad. And every time I look up and see one of those windmills spinning and I see somebody plucking energy and money right out of the air, it makes me happy. I'm glad to see that. But even in central Montana, the wind doesn't blow every day. Even in the middle of the desert, the sun doesn't shine every day. And we like electricity every day. That means we need another source of electricity. We have to power our electric plants with something else. You can't do it with nuclear. It takes too long to get the nuclear process up and running. You can't do it with coal. It takes too long to get those plants started. You need something agile. You need something that you can start and stop on a dime, and that's natural gas. The only source of energy that'll do this is natural gas. A natural gas plant can be stopped and started whenever you need it to accommodate the fluctuations of wind and solar. In reality, natural gas, a hydrocarbon fossil fuel, is the key to making renewable energy happen in this economy because it plugs the gaps on all those days when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Again and again, we hear statements that cast energy development and hydraulic fracturing in a bad light. But when we do the Mythbusters thing and put those myths to the test again and again, we find the science questionable and the facts very questionable. Brothers and sisters, it's time to dispel these myths and deal with energy development on the basis of fact. We need energy. We like energy because we love the lifestyle it provides. So we have to put away the myths and the hysteria and deal with energy development on the basis of fact. What's at stake here? Reality is we are committed to petroleum as an energy source for the foreseeable future. Solar, wind, alternative energy sources, they have potential, but they're years away from being able to really carry the load. There's always going to be a mix, a portfolio of energy sources, and petroleum is king. Ethanol made from corn requires more energy to produce than it creates. And something that's kind of hidden in all of this, solar panels. Silicon is a hot, dense material. You can't process silicon without large amounts of energy, which in this economy comes from natural gas and oil. We are married to petroleum, and we need to focus on doing petroleum very, very well. What's at stake here? This is kind of an interesting plot. This is a plot of energy production in the United States, actually oil production in the United States since very early on, 1950. You see in this post-war period, oil was ramping up. We hit something called peak oil here about 1970. This is about the time I was trying to decide where to go to college. It fell off a little bit. Burt, Todd joined the industry right there. It peaked, well, not, it wasn't me. That was Prudhoe Bay coming on. By the early 80s, it started falling, and it fell, and it fell, and it fell. And we all know the results of that. Our balance of trade has been steadily declining because we have to import so much oil. This has created huge inflationary pressures. We've gotten into a healthcare crisis because the high cost of energy has crippled manufacturing on this continent. No blue-collar labor, no workers with health benefits. Sure, we have a health crisis. Our military has been involved in adventures in the Middle East, and despite what anybody says, that is to protect our sources of oil. But look what's happening. The revolution. Beginning in 2008, we see this thing kick up hard. That's unconventional reservoirs. Once again, we are producing the energy we need to fuel the economic engine of this country. What's at stake here? For the first time in my life, the United States is within reach of being energy self-sufficient for the first time. Decades. You saw the plot. This means an improved balance of trade. This means a reduction of inflationary pressures. It means stable blue-collar jobs with benefits. That's men and women working with health care benefits. It takes the stress off our health care system. It means revitalized energy. Nothing is more attractive to a manufacturing startup than a secure source of cheap energy. And for all of us with daughters and sons of a certain age, secure energy here in North America means we don't have to go on military adventures to maintain our oil supply. The stakes are high, but success is within our grasp. What's it going to take? The responsible use of new technology. I'm talking long horizontal wells, I'm talking multiple hydraulic fracks, I'm talking research on enhanced oil recovery. That's a big one, that's something I'm involved in personally. We'll talk more about that later. But I think most importantly, it requires cooperation with an engaged and educated public. We don't want a rubber stamp. We don't want permission to do everything. An engaged public is necessary. We just want to debate the issues on the basis of fact, not myth. This requires that we recognize that we're all in the same boat, that we all need energy, and in our lifetimes that means petroleum. It requires that we deal with all this on the basis of fact and not myth. Who benefits? Well, it's not big oil. Big oil has kind of stood back from the unconventional reservoir revolution. They're not that excited about it. The costs are too high. They'd rather go drill something new and exciting in Russia or Indonesia or offshore Australia. The people that benefit are mom and pop operations here in the United States. The people that benefit are everyone who drives and lives indoors. The people who benefit is everyone who wants to see a strong national economy. Everyone who deplores military adventures in foreign lands to secure an oil supply. Everyone who wants a revitalized industry and a strong middle class. I think that counts most of us. At this point, Bill, I understand you have some comments on industry standards and practices. Let's see if the engineers could pull that off again.
All right. Well, Burt teed up the above ground part of what I want to talk about before we go back to the future of technology. Remember on that first slide I showed, we talked about some things happening in a revolutionary sense below ground, and he's explained the long laterals and the hydraulic fracturing and those kinds of things. But remember I said at the start that the oil and gas revolution is about more than that. And now let's talk about some of the above ground things that are keeping pace with the oil and gas revolution below the ground. First of all, Burt left off with the engaged citizens and with what I call stakeholders of a broad range. And one of the things that we're seeing now that the oil and gas industry is paying a lot of attention to, more so than in the past, probably more so than they should have earlier in my career, for example, is stakeholders and concerns. And remember, I put the new in quotes, new stakeholders. Well, these stakeholders aren't really new. They are stakeholders who may not have seen the scope or scale or size of the oil and gas activity that we're seeing today, or they may be in areas that haven't had any because they haven't seen traditional oil and gas development. But the other stakeholders might be community leaders, royalty owners, concerned citizens, activists, and I put another bullet there because there are probably a whole bunch more that I could mention. And this is part of the revolution. We're seeing much more engagement. I think everybody in this room is here because this has attracted attention and you've become more engaged. New concerns. Well, these concerns, again, aren't necessarily new, but they're new in the sense that they're now kind of front burner concerns and things that the oil and gas industry and regulators are dealing with. I mentioned just a few of them here. Hydraulic fracturing that we've already spent a great deal of time on. Community impacts, and we know there are impacts, particularly when you have the early stages of oil and gas development with needs for infrastructure and that kind of thing. Water management. Over there is a picture on the right of a centralized water handling lagoon that allows a company to ship water into multiple directions with one centralized facility, not trucking as much water to various well pads, for example. Water management is a big deal these days, both in terms of quality management and quantity management. Land stewardship. You see there, you can't tell exactly what those green and blue fans are, but those are individual well locations where together, this happens to be in North Texas in the Barnett Shale, they're drilling 56 wells from 2 locations. Again, conserving the use of land by consolidating facilities. It's part of what we're seeing in the energy revolution today. Seismic activity, I want to say a little more about that in a minute when I talk for Tom Richmond, who can't be here, about state regulation. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the seismicity area. Climate effects, where there's been concern about whether we're leaking methane to the atmosphere and what the industry has been doing. I just completed a 9-city tour with the BBER doing energy keynotes around the state and using as a prop a new valve that's being put into facilities that reduces methane emissions to the atmosphere by 90%. That's part of the revolution. This is a technology that has continued to evolve all around what's happening below the ground. And transportation. We all know about rail transportation and about pipeline issues, and you know that all of those things are being addressed, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that's happening in just a minute. But these new responsibilities that come with these concerns actually require a lot of different approaches. And Burt mentioned the operating practices and standards. I want to talk a little bit about that. Regulation and enforcement, make sure that there aren't bad apples and that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then I'm going to have a couple of words to say about communication that is being stepped up across the oil and gas industry and with communities and that kind of thing. Let's talk about these operating practices and standards. The worldwide standards for oil and gas operations really focus on the American Petroleum Institute. As Burt said, this is where the industry was born. It's where the standards really, in most cases, have emanated in history. And now, of course, there are European standard setting bodies and others, but API still is looked at as foremost in this field. These are just some of the standards that have been upgraded or put into effect since the shale energy revolution that address the very issues and concerns that you saw on the other list. Everything from well construction and integrity guidelines all the way down to managing engagement with the community. Again, this set of standards and guidelines and many more are marching in lockstep with the evolution of the technology and what we're seeing in the oil and gas revolution across the country and perhaps in the future around the world. These standards apply to all phases of operations, and industry abides by them. Everything from the earliest to the exit phase of an oil and gas project. And the standards process, not well understood, it's an ANSI process. It comes under the American National Institute for Standards. It's a peer-reviewed and periodically updated process that's open to stakeholders, environmental groups, technology organizations, others participate in the API standards program, including Indian tribes, I might mention, because we know that there is a lot of increased interest in even more production from tribal lands in Indian country. Technical work is always ongoing, and then there is regular interaction and communication with state and federal government entities. What about communication? Well, the industry, as you saw, has a standard that it abides by, or is supposed to abide by, in terms of engaging with communities. But what the industry found over the past decade or so of the shale revolution is that it was always on the defensive, and so it started more and more local, on-the-ground outreach, engaging local communities, and also doing some advertising. And let me just show you some of the types of ads that the industry has been doing in various parts of the country. You'll see when we see the ads that they're really designed to convey a sense that real people are engaged in this activity. It isn't a faceless company or corporation.
Jason's grandparents built this ranch, and we worked hard to keep it in the family. So we do our best to protect what's ours. With all the stories out there, some people were surprised that we allowed fracking on our land. But we talked with experts and learned the facts about drilling for oil and natural gas. And guess what? It's safe. Safe for our land, our water, and the air. When you know the facts, you understand why we need this now and for the future.
Learn the facts at energyfromshale.org. Energy used to be from somewhere else. It's not anymore. Energy is from here. North Texas is on the cusp of a transformation, and we see it in education. Students now see that the energy business has enough resources to drive it. When we take a look at natural gas production here, we are talking about environmental stewardship. What really gets the kids excited now is a future and opportunities in it.
Well, the standards are great. The communication like this, I guess, is great. But what about who's minding the store? Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about regulation and enforcement. One of the other things that I mentioned in the above ground area or arena is part of the oil and gas revolution that we're seeing today. In the regulation of oil and gas, the states lead. In our system, as you know, we have different levels that have different responsibilities constitutionally, and in this area, the states not only enforce state law and regulation, but they also have primacy for enforcement of federal law, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, those kinds of things in almost every case, not every case, but almost. And they've migrated to that view because of the local conditions and the expertise that the states have to deal with their own issues. And what we see is the state-led enforcement for those reasons has led to a whole list of the regulated activities that you see there. Every one of the things that we've talked about as a concern area has a state lead component to it. And the states are in charge, basically, of making sure that the operators and others do what they're supposed to be doing. If Tom Richmond were here, Tom was, until he was appointed to be a state representative, he was actually head of the oil and gas division of the Montana Department of Natural Resources, and that's why Tom was going to be doing this part of the presentation. But Tom would tell you that it's necessary for, and the states are really moving toward, continuous improvement in all of these regulatory areas, and they're doing it now under what's called the States First Initiative. It's a program that's a joint venture of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, which is made up of the 30-some states that have oil and gas production and their governors, and the Groundwater Protection Council, which is an organization that represents the state environmental directors and the state oil and gas directors in oil and gas producing states and well beyond. So it's made up of environmental regulators. These two organizations have put together this initiative to make sure that in view of, and by the way, it was driven by the oil and gas revolution that we've been talking about, to make sure that there's a robust regulator exchange that allows regulators to share best practices, to bootstrap one another, to make sure that they're doing the right thing and meeting the right standards, and then doing peer reviews to make sure that they are doing as well as they can to protect their environments and communities and that kind of thing. The priorities of the States First Initiative are those that I've listed there, and you'll notice the top one is transparency. You don't hear much now about transparency. A few years ago, what you heard was, well, nobody knows what's going down in those wells. But the states, back in 2011, created something called Frac Focus. It's an online registry where you and I can go and search by county, by well location, and we can find the actual well and see everything that goes down into the well. The companies report on a voluntary basis, or started reporting on a voluntary basis, and putting volumes of water, types of proppants, types of additives, and what those additives are. Also on that website, which I highly recommend to you, you can actually see some very good layman's explanations of what Burt talked about, hydraulic fracturing, how this process is done, what the horizontal wells do, what the chemicals or the additives that go in the ground are, what their effects are, all of those kinds of things. And so Frac Focus 3.0, brand new version just announced, has seen remarkable success. In fact, already there are 886 companies in the U.S. that have been reporting on Frac Focus, and there's a similar program now in Canada that was transferred up there by Groundwater Protection and IOGCC, and it gets lots of visitors from all around the world. So the transparency issue is now being addressed very aggressively, and it was, again, with state lead beginning back in 2011. If you look at the map over here on the right, what you see is the green shaded states are states that require transparency, that require reporting of what's going into every oil and gas well that's hydraulically fractured. The ones that have the little dots in the middle, like Montana, they require that that be done on this public website, Frac Focus. Others report or require reporting just to the state. And then a couple of the states in red over there are considering what kind of disclosure they're actually going to have. And so again, states taking a very aggressive approach toward this. The other priorities that I mentioned the states have these days, including training and enforcement practices and all those kinds of things, include seismicity, induced seismicity. Now Burt touched on this, and he's absolutely right in terms of the hydraulic fracturing effects, the induced seismicity questions. However, there's a little bit more to the story, and Burt can jump in here if he would like to. By the way, this is a 200 geophone test patch in Oklahoma that my company did, and listened for 20 days during hydraulic fracturing operations. And this little blue graph here was a plot of the vibrations of the hydraulic fracturing, which was done along two parallel paths. You can see the red one there. And this was freight train vibrations from a mile away. So you kind of get a sense of the scale and difference of the vibrations. But the real issue that we've come to know a lot more about isn't the hydraulic fracturing itself. It's what happens when you dispose large quantities of water into deep formations under high pressure. Now, disposal wells throughout the United States have existed for decades and decades. They are regulated by the state. There are different classes of disposal wells. There are hazardous disposal wells for hospital waste and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then there are these saltwater wells. So there are now studies that are being undertaken by GWPC and IOGCC, U.S. Geological Survey, to find out what the best practices ought to be if people are going to try to put a disposal well in a particular location. Already, my company, when I was there several years ago, already had best practices where we would use our seismic imaging to make sure that if we were going to drill or propose or even contract with somebody up for a disposal well to put salt water into the ground, that we weren't going to do it into a fault and lubricate that fault. So again, the industry, government, the states are moving pretty aggressively to make sure that to the extent good practices can resolve these issues, that people are paying attention and that they do it. But it's another example of how these aren't issues that are just being left alone. They're being addressed, and we can debate whether or not they've been addressed fast enough or they'll be addressed aggressively enough. But in terms of the revolution, it's a sign of the times that all of these things now are being paid attention to. And now I'm going to let Burt take it over and talk about what's ahead in terms of technology.
Haven't dropped it yet. Bill touched on a couple of things that I'd like to follow up on just briefly. He showed you that one picture of a well location with well bores going in all directions. This is a direct outgrowth of a concerned public getting involved, making their voices heard, and leading to improvements in best practices. I flew over, I was flying into West Texas one time, and I took off out of Midland, Odessa, which is just out in the middle of Texas, which is it's just nowhere. I mean, it's a long ways. It's 6 hours to any place on Texas roads in a very large car. I don't know what that is in miles. But I flew all the way to Houston, and virtually the whole distance, it was lights on a grid pattern everywhere. And those were all well locations. And Texas has been the center of the oil industry for close to a century. And the way it used to be done had these well locations everywhere. But because of a concerned public making their voices heard, and because of an industry that recognizes that in this day and age we operate at the public's permission, we're doing a lot of things different and we're doing them better. And these well pads with 32 and 64 wells coming out of an area that we used to just have one well on is a great example of better environmental practices, better industry practices. And as a nerd, someone who likes doing petroleum things, it is no fun drilling straight down. It is exciting and challenging drilling down, sideways, hooking her around, and hitting a location a couple miles away. And so it's been a win-win. It's more economical, it's more environmentally sound, and it is a result of this public-industry partnership that we need to continue to grow. Having said that, like Bill said, I'd like to talk a little bit about some things coming in the technological world. Two things: microseismic development. For the first time, we can hear what's going on when these wells are fractured. I'd also like to talk about an area that I'm personally doing a lot of research in, and that is enhanced oil recovery in unconventional reservoirs. Now, part of the thing that we're dealing with here, these unconventional reservoirs, very low permeability, and on the average, the way the technology stands now, we're only going to recover about 10% of the in-place oil. 10%. That means we're leaving 90% in the ground. That is a level of waste that troubles me to the very depths of my soul. Okay, enhanced oil recovery. It's a technology that works very well on conventional reservoirs. It's unproven. We don't know if we can make it work on these shale reservoirs. There are a lot of technological hurdles. But I believe the nut can be cracked. I believe that enhanced oil recovery, EOR, holds the ultimate potential and these shale reservoirs in this unconventional revolution that's going on. Let's talk a little bit about the microseismic. This is kind of cool. Geophysicists, geologists, engineers, including a lot of them from Montana Tech, a lot of fellows I knew and went to school with, have developed over years of time and practice seismic techniques. Basically, we send sound waves into the ground, listen when they come back, and from that we can deduce the shape of what the rocks look like underneath. And that's very helpful for discovering these traps where oil is trapped in conventional reservoirs. We've even learned to do it over time to see how things change underground, 4D seismic. But now for the first time, we, with different types of instrumentation, we can actually hear what goes on underground. And the implications of this are astounding. If you hear where the fractures are happening, where they're being initiated, it gives us a lot better understanding of where we're fracking. It gives us a lot better understanding of how far they go. It gives us much better understanding of how big the fracks ought to be to minimize cost, maximize recovery. I want to take a look here at what I'm talking about. Is there a go button on that?
Should be running. There. Yeah, you might have to do it on a static display.
Okay, I regret this because there's kind of a neat animation that happens with this, but this is a bunch of data processed by these geophones, some of them on the surface of the ground, some of them buried in other wells, but they're listening. And what we see on the display here are a bunch of circles. The size of the circle tells you how loud it was. The color of the circle tells you when it happened, and the location of the circle is just the location. Now we see here a bunch of well bores coming down. This is 16 well bores coming off one pad. They all start out together and then they loop off to their destination. We see all these blue circles. This was a fracturing event. These yellows, this was another fracturing event. These reds. This is looking at one of these horizontal wells with the multiple hydraulic fracks on it. And you can see that everything is clustered right around the well bore. You get some growth up, you get some growth down, you get some growth sideways, but it's all very low. They're all very near the well bore. Those are numbers I quoted you earlier, fracture lengths and this 3 to 600 foot length. That's about how long some of these are. And this height growth, we're having maybe 300 feet of height growth show up here, but there's nothing going to surface. There's nothing, you can't hear any sound showing that these fractures are running away and breaking out at the surface. It's really an interesting technology, and it gives us a lot of tools for understanding better what goes on under the ground. It is this kind of innovation that will allow us to continue to drive the oil and gas revolution, and it'll take it beyond what we can even imagine today. Now, the other thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about is this enhanced oil recovery. I've been doing a modeling study. It's based on, it was funded by a grant from the Montana Board of Oil and Gas. Basically, I went to El Coulee. It's that big field over there by Sydney. Found an area, 6 sections, 3 wide, 2 tall, has 9 wells in it. I got all the geologic data I could, and I went and built a simulation model. And what we have here, all these symbols here, this is what the wells actually did. This is a oil rate. See, the highest oil rates are about 1,200 barrels a day, and then they fall off rapidly. These are cumulative oil rates. This is how much oil has been produced total out of the field. And the solid lines are what my simulation model did. And you see that the model is very accurate. It pretty much tracks what originally happened. The interesting part of this, though, is what it predicts for the future. I turned the model on and I ran it out to the year 2065 to kind of get a look at what will happen in the Bakken if we don't do anything. And it's pretty obvious. Production falls. Now this is 1,000 barrels a day when it was new, and it falls to 600 and 400 and 200. And out into the future, every time you see one of these little jags, that's a well dying. That's a well becoming uneconomic, not worth producing anymore. It's a 9-well section. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 9 of those places where a well goes off production. 2065, it's all over. All the wells have gone off production. Now, and you can see here that it's recovering about 4 million barrels of oil out of that 6-section acre. It sounds like a lot, But that's really only about 15% of the oil that's in the reservoir there. Okay, that's the case if we do nothing. Now we're looking at a lot of these EOR techniques, and one thing that I have a lot of interest in, so here's our 6-section area in the computer model. These wells with fracks on them are the original producing wells. One of the things we're looking at is drilling an injection well between each one of these producing well pairs. Injection wells. And then we'll pump produced natural gas down those injection wells. Now the big news there is we're catching the gas, we'll be catching the gas, re-injecting it, flaring, natural gas will be over with. Gas is a precious natural resource. It's an excellent EOR fluid. And we're looking at schemes to re-inject that gas, stop flaring, and increase oil recovery. And here's one of the projections from that. Here again is what happens if we do nothing. But we start gas injection right here, and we immediately get a spike in the oil rate, and then it tapers off. And you see here's the cumulative predicted recovery, and it increases and increases and increases. Now this is a simulation that's running on my little old office PC, and it's tying up. I can't open a window, I can't read email, or my computer is busy, so I shut it off at 2065. But look what's happened. If we do nothing, all the wells have stopped. 2065, we're still producing 200 barrels a day out of these 9 wells, and the curve is going up. It continues to go up. And note here, what we're buying, this delta, this difference between here and here, this is the amount of oil, extra oil rate that we're producing with this enhanced oil recovery. And you'll notice something very, very interesting about that. It's almost a constant delta. This difference, this extra that we're producing, stays remarkably constant. If we do nothing, we get this huge spike, falls, dies. If we start this enhanced oil recovery process, we get this delta, and it just goes and goes and goes. There's this sense that these reservoirs, if managed properly, will be a gift to our children and our children's children, and very likely our children's children's children. This is part of this unconventional reservoir revolution. No longer is oil something that flash in the pan, produce it like crazy, and then go out and find more because those old wells are used up. These unconventional reservoirs have the potential to produce and produce over years. Now, what do the numbers look like? The economics are challenging because to do this enhanced oil recovery, there's a huge upfront expense. Had to drill 8 new wells, had to make a gas injection plant, had to make gas collection facilities. There's a lot of upfront investment. The economics are kind of marginal. 10 to 15% rate of return, long project life. But here's the key. These economics are very similar to manufacturing economics and agricultural economics. I told you I grew up on a farm. The hardest thing a farmer ever does is buy land. Huge investment. And you have to do it early in your career. You don't have anything to farm. But if you could somehow lay your hands on land, you farm that and it produces and it produces, and one day you hand it off to your children and they make a living on it too. These economics are very much like farming and agricultural economics in that the project lives are generations long. More of this oil, this unconventional oil revolution. And the thing that happens here is pretty crazy over the Wilson Basin. It's a gold rush, oil boom economy. There's man camps, there's trucks on every road, it's chaos. As we transition out of the drilling period and into this enhanced oil recovery period, it's a much different economy. There's an increased tax base, there's a lot of jobs for skilled blue-collar labor, there's people buying houses and putting their children in the school system. That is part of the benefit of a stable, homegrown energy supply. I believe that as we continue to develop this technology, you'll be hearing more about this. I believe that at some point this will merit some special tax incentives to help get these projects off the ground. And I'm confident that the economic future of Montana, North Dakota, Saskatchewan, part of Winnipeg, I'm confident their economic future is intimately tied with this enhanced oil recovery technology applied to these unconventional shale reservoirs. Having said all that, I want to say thank you, and we'd be glad to entertain any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Well, if I could ask you, maybe you could have a seat next to Bill. And I think this has been a wonderful opportunity to learn from experts. And so now it's time to customize their remarks by responding to what your concerns are. And as I said, I think we're a fairly small group, and I think we can, is that going to, yes, that's right. I think we can just deal with individually. I've got some questions here, but I always hate it when the moderator asks the first question. Why let the moderator do that? So let's hear from the audience. Who has the first question? Right over here, yeah.
Would you guys believe that fracking used 6.5 billion gallons of water in Montana last year?
I don't know what the number is. I have no reason to dispute that number. Sure.
Does it seem like a lot?
Well, it's a consumptive use of water. Now, if you put that in perspective as to how much is used for agriculture, watering golf courses or whatever, I think you might be surprised at how much water that is compared to other uses. What I can say is, as I showed there with one example, is that the industry, and in many respects at the encouragement and the requirement of the state of Montana and other states, is crunching back, recycling, reusing, managing that water in a much better way than might have been the case at the start of the revolution.
I would add to that, I had a nice chat with some gentlemen from Nalco Chemical last week, and they are pioneering a recovery technology down in the Niobrara area around Denver, where they've created a business out of it. They capture the fracked water at flowback, they take it off their plant, they run it through enough cleanup operations. You don't want to drink the stuff, but you sure can use it to frack again with. And so what we're seeing now is a much more efficient, more environmentally sound way of reusing this water. A lot of that water is going to go down the well and up several times. The water might get a little bit dizzy from all that, but we're reusing a lot of this, and it's economically sound and is very ecologically and environmentally sound.
Well, I have another question here on a card, which is fantastic. By all means, use the cards if you'd like. That's great. And I guess I'll direct this question to you, Bill, since you mentioned it. The questioner says, are all the additives used in fracking actually reported in Frac Focus? And what about the Halliburton exception? I don't know what that is, but maybe you do.
I do. Let me start with the Halliburton exception. I think it's often called the Halliburton loophole. And what it really had to do with was a provision of the 2005 Energy Act that said that hydraulic fracturing couldn't be regulated under the underground injection control program of the EPA. That it had to be regulated in another way, because the underground injection control program actually is designed to keep fluids in the ground. Hydraulic fracturing is designed to put the fluids in and then pull them out of the ground. That has been now morphed into a belief that what it did was prevent the regulation of hydraulic fracturing, and that's not the case. The EPA still has jurisdiction under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and in fact has attempted to prosecute a couple of people. Those cases were proven to be not meritorious. But that's the Halliburton loophole. And then in terms of what is reported, if a company isn't reporting, particularly in those states that require it, then there are penalties. But the whole program is based on the notion that everything that goes in is reported. Now, the only exception to that is, and this may be what they're referring to with the Halliburton, is that a legitimate trade secret can be protected in terms of the exact makeup of the fluid from public disclosure. But the state has the right to know, and every state does know and can enforce the provision that those elements be disclosed to the state regulators.
Good. Thanks. Another question right here.
This is a related question. You mentioned in your presentation, and it's for both of you, that the waste disposal aspect of this is regulated by the states. And I'm wondering if you could be more specific about what those wastes are. What are the big headaches in terms of waste management? You mentioned water use and water recycling, but in terms of other types of wastes that are associated, what are the big ones? What gives people headaches in terms of either their interactions with the public or just waste management? And then, not in a regulatory context, but in a business context, where do you see in that space room for innovation, for new entrepreneurship, for new technical advances, those sorts of things? If you could speak to that kind of from the entrepreneurship, technical engineering aspect, that would be great.
Do you want to add, or?
I'd take a quick stab at that. The number one, in my experience, the number one waste that gets re-injected down wells is produced water. You know, I mean, we don't produce just oil. It comes up a lot of times with some water with it, but it's not good water. It's salty. It has a lot of heavy metals in it, and the number one thing the operating company needs to do is make sure none of that gets into the water system, none of it gets into the drinking water, none of it gets into the surface streams. So the favorite way of disposing of it is to find old formations, abandoned oil reservoirs where there's already a well, and just pump it down, fill up some old oil reservoir that's empty and is not being used anymore. As kind of a sideline to that, if you have a well, and we're talking conventional reservoirs here now, it doesn't really work in unconventional, but we re-inject produced water to chase oil towards the other producing wells. And in my experience, the number one thing we're trying to get rid of is produced water. Now, another waste, although it's not really a waste, is used drilling mud. And I know in the old days, drilling mud is mostly bentonite, which is a form of clay, and you can grow stuff like crazy on it. And in the old days, we would just kind of spread it out on the ground and try and get some, mix it with some straw and try and get things growing on it. But it turns out that the better use of drilling mud is just recycling it. And the industry has developed much better techniques for cleaning it up, getting the rocks, getting the solids out of it, and then ship it off to the next well, reuse it again as drilling mud. And as part of the outgrowth of an involved, concerned public, we've found a lot of ways of not disposing of a waste, but reusing. It's another form of recycling. And it's good ecologically, it's good environmentally, but it's also good from a business standpoint because it's much cheaper to reuse than to recreate and reinvent.
Two quick examples. Entrepreneurship. Devon in the Barnett Shale, which is where the code was cracked, and by Devon, marrying these technologies, early on in that process was troubled by the amount of water that came back up and that had to be disposed of, and actually allowed a company called Fountain Quail to come in and do demonstrations and try to develop a way of using an electrolytic process to run the produced water through and clean it up. And they can actually clean water to drinking water standards through this kind of process. Now, you can't do that everywhere because sometimes the salinity is so great, I mean, it just doesn't work. But that and companies that are contracting to manage water with these settling ponds that I mentioned, I showed there, like a lake almost, to allow solids to settle out and then try to make sure that they can pipe water in temporary pipes and all that. Great opportunities for entrepreneurs, and you're seeing that in the oil patch these days. And then finally, there's my friend, the retired airline pilot up in the Flathead Valley that took a trip over to the Bakken and decided that there was a need for water hauling. So he bought a used truck and started hauling water for producers over there. And then he bought another truck, and eventually his company was bought by another. I mean, to me, the entrepreneurship and the innovation is almost unlimitless when you start seeing the scope and scale of these activities.
Great question. Yeah, right back there.
I really appreciate both the presentations. They're excellent. And I've come into this meeting with an open mind because I really wanted to know more about what was going on. So Burt, I appreciate your geological perspectives, and there's part of this that seems too good to be true. But I had some questions that I'm beginning to understand that fracking is kind of new. It's a way to recover, and I'm still astounded that 90% of the oil is still in the ground, and that fracking can improve those efficiencies of recovery, and that EOR can get up to 35% more efficient recovery. So if you've got an impact on the surface, you've got equipment and wells, it makes sense to try to get as much as you possibly can out of the ground, out of the geology, with minimal impacts, right? I understand that all makes sense, and I'm much more in favor of this than tar sands in Canada. Would you agree? Or is it a totally different animal?
I want to make a comment on that too.
If I had tar sands myself, I might think otherwise, but I don't. As an engineer, I totally agree. This Bakken crude we're producing is wonderful stuff, 45-degree ABI. It's a high gasoline cut. It's clean. It's just a wonderful product. The dream is that we get out of this drill, frac, complete economy and morph into something that Oklahoma and Texas have known forever. Seems like forever, but it's 60 to 80 years where oil patch is just another job that a guy might go into. You know, you might stay on the farm, you might go to college, or you might go work in the oil field. And it's not drilling rig jobs, it's not man camp jobs. It's this using this existing infrastructure, as you said, and using it long-term to extract oil out of these formations. The tar sand thing, that's Alberta, and I don't know too much about it, but I know there are issues with this.
First of all, I think it's a great set of questions. I think you have to think about these as not either or, though, because the oil sands production is much different quality, and these days, you and I probably have the vision of the big tar sands or oil sands mines, the open pit mines and the trucks carrying the sand and all that. These days, the way the oil sands is produced is by what they call steam-assisted gravity drainage. They drill one of these horizontal wells like this, and then they drill one right along the same path, and they pump steam through the top one, and it melts the oil and causes it to flow to the second one, and then it's pumped back up to the surface. The reason I know that is because Devon is the only independent U.S. company involved in the oil sands in Canada using this kind of technology, and, believe it or not, uses no fresh water. The steam is produced by brackish water that comes from deep below the ground, and so, you know, it's kind of apples and oranges. We wanted to make sure that both the production that we see here through hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, which couldn't happen without the marriage of those two technologies. It's not just one of them. And the oil sands, whatever is done the right way, and that, as the gentleman over here pointed out, you know, we're trying to minimize or prevent the use of water. So.
Okay, this has been a great discussion. I'm going to have one question, and I'll take one more question, John, but I got to pick on Professor Todd here and say that I know as an engineer you love projects. Engineers want to do things. I'm an economist, I deliver bad news. The price of oil is low. Accountants tend to say no in those situations. So my question is, these low oil prices, we already heard from Alan Kaminsky this morning about what's expected to happen to production. Is the same thing going to happen to innovation? Are you going to be told no on these prices that you want to roll out?
Love the question because it addresses something that I'm right in the middle of. First thing I want to say though is, you know, oil is a commodity. Once you produce a barrel of oil, I can't really argue that mine's any better than yours, and that leads to a certain inflexibility in prices. If the demand falls this much, the price falls that much. These white whiskers have been around for a while. This is my 6th one of these oil price free falls. First was in 83, then there's one in 89, and there's one in 92, and in 99, and 2003, 2009, and now this one.
they happen at regular intervals. It's the nature of a commodity market. And oddly enough, I'm almost relieved this one happened because it gives us some breathing room. Now, no one's going to go out and invest in enhanced oil recovery right now. The economics are not good. But this little breathing period we have, we can get out of this drill, frac, complete rat race. We can start stepping back, looking at technology, studying the thing, and when the prices come back, like they have the last 5 times it's happened to me, we'll be ready. And that will be the time to invest. That will be the time to make this investment in our future. And so, I'm taking a breath here, but I think that a year from now, there's going to be renewed interest, renewed excitement in all of these technological innovations.
Let's take one last question. Gentleman right here, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, but I'm, name's Alvin Reedy, I serve as the Chippewa Creek Tribe's Cultural Resource Preservation Department. And you had mentioned in one of your slides that you had worked with tribes. How are you dealing with tribes that say, and we'll use it back as an example, 27 tribes having Aboriginal homelands? How are you consulting with those tribes that may have potential sacred sites or sites of cultural effects?
Well, first of all, if you're on federal lands, you know the requirements in tribal lands very well. Companies and under the API process that I sketched out there, that consultation on the ANSI process, I was talking about the creation of those standards. API has an outreach program for tribes. Now, I don't know whether they go to the Council of Resource Tribes, you know, the umbrella organization, or to individual tribes, but the process is open. So that if your tribe, for example, wanted to plug into it, it's probably pretty easy to make that connection. But there's a lot of attention being paid. I don't know, I'd like to hear from you whether you think it's working. I don't know, but you know.
And you're with Devon, you said?
I was.
Yep. There are certain projects, particularly done by Devon, that desecrated sacred sites. One that happened in 2010, 2007. A number of elders went out and looked at a project. Devon was going to drill three wells. They went out, looked at the site, and noticed that there was a fasting site that's been there for years and years and years. And with our on-site archaeologist made a report that suggested through these elders that maybe they should deviate from this site. 3 years later, on the fiber optics project, they went out and took a look, and they seen this line go destroyed the site right to this date.
Where was this again?
This was in the north central Montana, north of the Bear Paw Mountains.
Okay.
Both Devon and BLM and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who are the trustees to that, where the tribe owns the subsurface, non-Indian owns the surface. There's another case about 8-9 years before that where that was vice versa, where the tribe owned the surface, the state of Montana owned the subsurface.
But afterward, let's talk. And I would like to get your information. I'm going to check on that for you.
Sure.
That's great.
Well, great. Well, that brings us right to the end of our session. I apologize for going a minute or two over. That's the problem with being at the end of the day. You know, there's not another one after this right away. First off, let's give a great round of